you marched 2010 Vanguard, and I gotta say, I gotta ask. I watched a few YouTube videos. Who tuned those snare drums? Because they sounded like they were super cranked. I don't think I've heard any snares tuned higher than that.
Yeah, they were reefed. It was, I mean, Murray tuned quite a bit, and then our snare techs, Jim Ragsdale and Michael Hardwick. But I think that was just like that was what they were used to, and that's the sound they liked. And
Yeah, yeah. Were those flam heads you guys were playing on?
yeah, yeah, there were Black Maxes and then flams on the bottom.
Yeah, I've always been kind of curious about that because just watching videos, I'd be like, man, those drums are cranked. Yeah.
Did you have any culture shock going from one caption head to another caption head and then to Vanguard, or because of the programs and because of the teaching, it wasn't that big of a, you didn't have to change your hands very much place to place?
No, I mean, I think there was significant differences, right? Like I said, Brian Stevens was super molar. Kevin Welborn was pretty restricted, and wrist turn, and then got to Vanguard and it was just a little different. And we were trying all those experimental techniques that year with push pull and finger yoga and all of that. So each caption head, I think, had just their own version of the technique. And again, like I said, from an outsider's perspective, you kind of think it's all the same. But when you kind of dive in a little bit more and dissect it, it was very different. But that to me was really cool because again, it was just like sports where it was like, okay, I learned how to shoot a three, like now this guy's going to teach me how to do a left-handed layup, and I can implement that into my game now. And so to me, I just liked learning. I liked learning all the different versions. So like I said, being a student of the game was always fun.
After 2010, there's a percussion change there at Vanguard. Murray goes to Academy, and you followed Murray, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna say, was that a hard choice to make, or how did that all go down?
So 2011 was an interesting year in general. I had all plans of returning to Vanguard and being, with Murray. And then that change happened, and I have the utmost respect for Paul. Obviously, like he is the top of the activity right now. I do wish I would have gotten to learn from Paul. Like I think that would have been a really fun thing. In 2011, again, money is tight, and being able to fly to camps, things like that. And I was taking the MCAT that year, so I had already had a little bit of doubts in my brain. And crazy enough, again, how the world works, but there was a Bluecoats camp in Austin that year. And I was going to school in Austin, and it was 10 minutes from my apartment. And so I drove to that. I got a call back, and it was Eric Schreiber who was there. And he kind of was like, "Hey, are you gonna come to the January callback?" And I was like, "Well, thinking about it, because if it wasn't Murray, I think Mike was like the closest thing." And he's like, "I really think you should go to the camp." It's like, okay, like, and I actually didn't end up going. And I didn't know this until several years later, where Mike's philosophy was if he thinks that there's a ringer, as a person who could make the line, they actually don't call back many people. And I guess when they got to the callback, he told me later that they were holding a spot for me and I didn't go. And so they were a little upset where they were like, Mike turned to Schreiber, goes, "Where's your boy? Like, where's the guy? Where's the Texas kid?" And I hadn't shown up. And so that's actually why they had to go find Nicole Casino. And so he auditioned her at a high school, and that's how she got that 10th snare spot. But yeah, I was just, at that point, then I was like, I could take a summer off. I still have a bonus year for the age out. Like, I can focus on school. The classic thing that everyone says, right? Like I didn't march because I'm going to focus on other things. And then in May, like throughout the course of those, months, Brian Stevens, so my caption head from Troopers '08 went to Academy, and then my caption head from Vanguard 10 went to Academy. So I had all of the people who had taught me essentially at the Academy. And so they kept calling me and I, kept refusing. And then it was actually in May where they called, they said they would help me out financially with flights, and Glenn even called me and was like, "Hey man, like, I don't know who you are, but everyone talks about you. So like, let's make this thing work." And I actually, again, went in after Memorial Day. So I went in after they had already been moved in for a week and a half, and just kind of jumped in and just had a good summer. And it was honestly awesome. It was a super fun summer.
So after 11, and what's funny is when you talk about Shriver, whatever you said that he told you, I heard that in his voice because it's you even kind of have the same mannerisms of him, the way he would say it, you know. But
Yeah.
so you march 11, and then 2012, you do end up at Bluecoats in one of probably one of their more iconic lines, at least internally. Like I mentioned this talking with the aged out guys, the Bluecoats guys, they always talk about that 2012 line. A lot of people teaching today's activity
Mm-hmm.
were in that line. So how did you end up back there after 2011?
I kind of again had that itch of I want to be at the top of the activity somewhere, and but I had at that point I was at the end of my career and I realized like pedagogically and philosophically that kind of West Coast Murray thing was the thing that I really enjoyed and Mike was he was at Vanguard, 06, 07, and I thought the same of him. I loved what he did. And I saw what Bluecoats were doing, and they were kind of that next group to take the reins of that. And so again, the audition was 10 minutes from my house. I went and I got a call back. And then that year, actually, I decided to like make the jump and go to the January camp. And so I actually went there, and the rest is kind of history. But I auditioned and was fortunate enough to get a spot.
You go through 2012, uh, you age out. Was continuing the activity as instructing, was that something you wanted to do, or was it somebody invited you and put that in your head and then you ended up doing?
The second one, yeah, I feel like that's kind of been the general theme where I always like talk myself out of doing something. Where I aged down and I was like, all right, it was a good chapter of my life. Let's keep moving forward, right? Let's do the job thing. Let's keep the trajectory. And then it was actually 2014, I think, when Mike went over to Blue Knights. He gave me a call and asked if I could do the Texas camps for him. Like we had talked about maybe working, but I told him no. And he asked about the Texas camps because he's very pragmatic and he wanted to save money on flights for a 1-day camp. And I said sure. So I actually did the camps for him in 2014 and 15. And then in 2015, which was the first year of Monarch, Ben Piles, he saw me teach at Monarch. We didn't know each other. I no interaction with him, but he saw me teach the camp. He saw me teach a little bit of Monarch, and he actually reached out and said, he was at Spirit of Atlanta at the time, and their snare techs had some life happen, where they had to bail out of their commitments, and they were looking for snare techs, and he's kind of like, hey, just not a big commitment, not a lot of time. Like, are you interested in this thing? And at the time, I was like, well, if it's just kind of something chill and easy, like, sure, like I'll help out a friend. And yeah, I did that, and that kind of again catapulted me into really understanding that I do like teaching the activity, and then kind of going back to Mike and being like, hey, I found a way to manage this with my schedule, and so then after that, it was just kind of with the Mike Jackson team at Blue Knights.
Do you think, because I mean, Mike's only exposure to you was that 1 year as a performer, was that 1 year at Coates, right? Um, do you think he saw something in you? Like he saw, I mean, because he theoretically he could have called a lot of people, you know. Do you, was there something that people saw in you that maybe you didn't see in yourself yet? Um, and, you know, was there anything that jumped out at you with that perspective change of going from performer to staff person? Because it is a kind of a big jump, right? Seeing it from the inside versus from the outside. I'm sure you obviously watched your instructors a lot and really absorbed, but it's another thing to see it from that perspective. It's another, it's a different thing to do it. So talk about that a little bit. Talk about maybe what you think people saw and what it was like to actually be a staff person standing out in front.
Yeah, I mean, I again, like you said, I think Mike could have called several people, and honestly, probably more capable people than me. I think part of what got me connected with him was, when he and I spoke, I told him my reasoning was I really liked the art he was putting out. And I think maybe that resonated with him where it wasn't that I wanted to teach snare drum. It was that the shows that he was doing spoke to me, and I if I was going to teach an activity, then I want to do it where it feels a certain way, and so I think that was something that maybe resonated with him. But again, I can't speak on his behalf. And like I said, I feel like there's plenty of much better instructors and snare staff that he could have gotten that maybe weren't available or something. As far as the teaching side, I do think that not jumping in right after I aged out was probably helpful. Where, like I said, I think that the thing that I notice is right when you age out, you're fully invested in the group that you aged out with as far as regurgitating information and philosophies and this is the way we should do things. And I think jumping out of the game for a little bit and being able to absorb everything and view the activity more from a lens of just an observer and not like a fan, so to speak, where I wasn't, I obviously thought, Bluecoats are awesome, Vanguard's awesome, all the places I march are awesome, but I wasn't, you know, solely like a sports fanatic, where you're like, Houston's going to win the championship. I was like, no, like the Houston Rockets kind of suck, so it was more realistic in that sense. I think I was more of a realist and I just enjoyed the activity and what everyone was doing for what they were doing. And I think that helped me formulate a way to like understand how I wanted to teach and what I wanted to teach. And then so when I jumped back into teaching, it was through that lens of just being a little bit more global and a little bit less like stuck in my ways, a little bit more open to seeing everyone's ways and picking what works and what doesn't, and then being open to accepting, sometimes that as an instructor, you don't have all the information, and you don't know all the answers, and that's okay. It's okay to admit that to the students, like, hey, I botched it today, like I wasn't prepared or I didn't know how to fix this thing. And I think that honesty and transparency with the students, at least what I've found in the past, is helpful, because then it doesn't feel like there's this weird power dynamic of I'm better than you. They're better than me. They're all my students are better than me. Like I don't have those chops. And so I think it's just helpful to realize that. So
Was that Mike's first year? Was that when he made the jump to Blue Knights?
so he went in 2014, and I did the camps for him then, but I didn't actually teach any of the summers, and he had his staff, like he had his full SoCal, Vista Marietta, Mission Viejo staff those first 2 years, and then I jumped on the third year.
And then Monarch started in 2015.
Correct.
What's it like to be there? Because I mean, I think a lot of people would say that Mike's time at Blue Knights, like when he went there, it was the start of something new for them. Maybe even for him too, for him and his staff and what they were creating. I always talk about it's different to create something than it is to sort of go somewhere and just maintain what had come before. And so you were a part of that at two different places. Was that experience? I mean, maybe you don't know because you don't have this sort of a different experience to compare it to. But was being there during a time like that for both organizations, was that a different and impactful experience for you?
Yeah, like you said, those are kind of the only experiences that I've been in. It's places that are either rebranding or starting. But I honestly think that I enjoy that. Like I like the underdog story. I like the building of a group. Like I said, like I want to kind of be like Batman. Like I want to fix things in the shadows and then kind of see it thrive, and then kind of sit back and watch from my couch and be like, I helped with that. Because it was the same at Sci-Fair. Like there was I don't want to say nothing because obviously that discredits the people that were there before, but there was a different thing, and I was able to come in and try to build something over time. And same thing with Monarch. It didn't exist, and then we created it, and at Blue Knights, like Mike had established his thing, and we were, like you said, trying to do something that was unique to the activity and very different from what everyone else was trying to do. Um, and so to me, that's kind of like my passion project is I would much rather go to the underdog and have to fight and work for it, because I think it helps build character and grit. Like it helps the students realize that what I like most is that the students kind of go through our programs and then they get to go to the top of the activity and succeed and get a medal and win, but they understand what the trenches feels like, and they're able to communicate that better to their students, because that's the hardest thing, right? It's like when you're teaching the younger students, like they don't know what they don't know, and they are naive to everything. And so if you treat them like the top of the activity, you're never going to get anywhere. And so I think having that realization, and it just feels more rewarding, it, to me personally. Obviously, I'm not going to speak on anyone else's behalf, but it feels rewarding to like for example, Sci-Fair had never made state finals in their history. I mean, this school has been alive for like, I don't know, 1,000 years. They're like dinosaurs. But last year we were able to make state finals for the first time, and it's like it's historic. It's like a thing that we are in the history books as this group made state finals, and I just think that's really cool because it leaves that lasting impact for the group, and going through that process together with everyone. Same thing with Monarch, like 2017, it was first year in world class, and group from Texas hadn't made world finals, and who knows? And we did it. And it was like, guys, this is historic. Like this is something for the record books of the first year world class group came out top seven, you know. And so I again enjoy that, and I hope to continue like what we were discussing earlier with like this Rift group, or some of these smaller groups. It's, to me, they're passion projects of, can we take something that has no foundation, that has no pre-existing, you know anything, and just try to build it in a way that is meaningful to everyone.
You mentioned earlier, you're talking about MCATs and you talk about Batman. If Taha Batman is the drum corps persona, what is Bruce Wayne Taha? Are you like a doctor?
No, no. So I did EMS and paramedic work. And so I was kind of doing that for a while, where I, running ambulances, and working
That's
at like ER
intense.
techs in
Yeah.
hospitals.
That's no
Yeah, it
joke.
was it was a definitely a very labor intensive part of my life. It was.
What is Bruce Wayne Taha then? What is your day job? What, like,
Yeah. So currently, I actually now I'm doing band full time.
band full time? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I used to, like I said, I was burning the candle at both ends, and I couldn't do it anymore. Like I was getting old enough where my body wasn't able to sustain that lifestyle. And so yeah, now I'm fully at doing band. Like I program coordinate, design, and teach Sci-Fair for the fall, and then for indoor, I design several places. Primarily teach at Sci-Fair. That's kind of the main gig. Um, but yeah, just trying to make it work like this.
What's been more stressful, working as a frontline first responder EMS or teaching drumline?
Yeah, I tell people it's two sides of the same coin, where it's one time you'll go to a motor vehicle accident and see the craziest thing you've seen, and then you go to a high school and you're like, come on, clean those left hands. And so it's just different managing both of those. There's the crazy stories from the paramedic side of things, but I think the high school side is interesting because what I realized is like, us as their percussion teacher or their marching band coaches, whatever you want to say, we're their longest standing teachers. We're the person they see the most. Like every other teacher, like for algebra, you get them for, a year, and then you have 500 kids or whatever. And then the next year you see 500 different ones. But like for this kid that I saw in sixth grade, I see them in seventh and in eighth and in ninth and in 10th. And in, so we're actually formulating a certain bond and relationship of educator to student over the course of a long, long time. And so it's kind of like seeing the fruits of your labor, so to speak, where you put this investment in this child, and then you see them become a young adult. And then the coolest thing, the thing that warms my heart the most, is that kids that I've taught like years down the road, like I got an email from a kid that I taught 10 years ago, which is crazy to think about, but he sent me an email and just like, hey man, like I just wanted to thank you for what you taught me when I was in high school. And he's like, I was kind of a little D-bag when I was in high school, and I realize that now, and I'm an engineer. And it's like, dude, like thank you for that update. Like that's just, it's crazy cool to see that you can influence someone's life in just the smallest way, and like germinate that seed, you know. So I think it's rewarding in both ways. Like saving people's lives is obviously rewarding, right? And being able to like rescue on the front lines, and then influencing these students' lives to again change their trajectory of their life is rewarding in a different way.
I can feel so many instructors that have been doing this for a little while, like nodding their heads. Exactly, because everybody has had that conversation, and it's you, and everybody has also had that conversation with that kid that maybe you didn't feel like you were connecting to in that moment, and it's validating for one, but also it kind of lets you know you just need to push through those moments and be consistent and keep doing it. So that's great. You know, something I realized we sort of didn't talk about, but we talked about the drum corps side of it. But what was your first experience, or through that time as a performer? Did you have any awareness of like what was going on indoor with indoor percussion and all of that?
No. Again, I was very naive to all of it. Indoor wasn't a big thing in Texas, especially back when I was a child. There were not a lot of groups. There was not a lot of exposure. Most schools did not do it. They focused heavily on the concert side. So my first exposure to indoor was actually when I marched drum corps. The people were like, "Hey, I do this thing indoor," and I was like, "Wait, what?" I'll never forget the bus ride in 2012. We were on the bus, and everyone on that Bluecoats line freaked out because I told them I hadn't seen Rhythm X08. Like I didn't know. And so they literally pulled out a DVD of the 2008 WGI World Championships and like educated me on everything that was going on. And so, yeah, it was really, really cool to like see that facet of it. And, again, like I felt, now that I look back on myself, like I feel I should have been more open and accepting to it, but I was a little highbrow. I was like, "Oh, we don't do indoor, like we're a concert band or whatever." Um, and yeah, it was when I graduated college and I came back to Houston, one of my friends, shot me a text message, and she was working with an indoor group and they needed help with the auditions, is what they told me. And, I went out and I helped them again. No understanding of what indoor is or supposed to be in it. So I think honestly, again, I feel like that kind of helped me teach it better, is I didn't have these like pre-existing thoughts about what it should be or how I'd want to do it. It was just, all right, there's this thing and here's the task at hand, and like, what's the best way to go about it? And so that year was actually, again, like, had no idea what it meant, but I was very fortunate. I taught Lone Star Independent. That was my first indoor teaching experience, and they ended up winning WGI. And so it was really cool. It was fun. I didn't know what that meant until I started teaching indoor more, and I was like, oh, like we actually did something really cool. Um, but at the time, I was just like, yeah, like we're trying to win. Like that's what we're trying to do. So it was cool.
You talk about earlier. You're talking about being part of the underdog. Helping to build stuff. You ever sit and realize that you're helping to create the indoor scene in Texas, where something had really never been, and now you have several indoor groups now, and
Yeah, we talk about that. So in Monarch, when we started it, we actually created like a mission statement, and one of my things, and maybe you'll see the competitive side of me, but I was like, I want Texas to be respected and considered a powerhouse, whereas when I was growing up, it was kind of the butt end of jokes, right? Like even at audition camps, like when we would do the Texas audition camps, they would, the drum corps would send one staff member who wasn't really like invested in it, like, oh, we don't get many drummers from Texas, and it was kind of this thing where I was like, I want to change that perception. I want to change the landscape of it. And so for that, again, I think there's a lot of groups in Texas that are now doing that, but I do feel like Monarch's main goal was to help build that, to build the culture and identity. I think we've like tripled in size of the circuit since we started. Like I think Texas is now the second biggest circuit in the nation. Um, and there's just as many PSW finalists in Texas as there are in California. Like we're building the PIW scene. VIP is incredible. They kind of started the ship for us way back in the early 2010s. Like they've been great since then. And so it does feel pretty cool to kind of see how far it's come in just a few years. And the coolest part about all of it is that most of the new groups have somebody from Monarch involved, whether it's like a tech or a director or a designer. Like the Monarch footprint has just spread all the way throughout.
At the time that we're recording this, it's kind of like pre-audition clinic season, and Monarch had like an experience camp. I don't know if I forget what you guys call it. this last weekend, and from everything that we saw from social media, big turnout,
Right.
right? So that kind of speaks
Yeah.
to what you're talking about. Is, I mean, because how do you really nurture that scene, right? And I think it begins with enthusiasm, right? And letting these students know that this exists, it's possible, you know, and so good on you. I mean, it's great. I think it's again another very validating thing where you guys are on the right path to actually achieving what you set out to do with that mission statement.
Are we almost to the point, to piggyback off what Georgia said, where there's going to be a second Monarch group, maybe a Monarch Open or a Monarch A?
Yeah. So funny enough, I, I tend to think very far in advance, and I think that's what allowed me at Monarch to do that with the board of directors because they're incredible. Like they're awesome at what they do. And so me and the president actually had a conversation in 2015. And I think you've probably heard this story. We had a 5-year plan. Like we were going to be, because we felt that groups in Texas were not necessarily mismanaged, but didn't think far enough ahead where they would have, a good year or something, but the next year would have to fold because of administrative issues or, logistics or facilities, whatever. So we had a 5-year plan of 5 years in A class. Like, let's build this the right way. Let's start to spread the footprint. Let's get the younger, groups involved. Let's make sure the high schools are being, influenced properly. And then 5 years in open. And then we said year 10, we're going to go world. We're going to do this thing, you know. Obviously that plan didn't work out. But for us, it was kind of that as well. Like in regards to everything that we do has a calculated thought process behind it. So when we started realizing it was actually getting significantly bigger than we thought, one of my like the thing that I'm struggling with the most is that, for Monarch, it's exponentially gotten to a point where now our students are very talented, very capable, but the high schools haven't quite achieved enough high schools haven't achieved that status yet. There's a ton of high schools who are starting indoor in the area, but they're just starting. They're A class, they're double A class, they're open, and they're doing the process well. Like they're building it the right way. But now we have this kind of mediator, like middle ground of students who are going to graduate high school, don't quite have that agency yet to be able to make Monarch, but they don't have any facility of I can go here and gain that experience. And so we were trying to create, a Monarch Open to allow that to happen and also to allow our recent age outs to start teaching so that they can kind of filter in and have this like, insular um, thought process. And the struggle, honestly, again, in Texas has been more than anything else. Like, I think we have everything in place. Like, we have designers, we have instructors, we have kids who want to do it. Is the logistics of it all.
Yeah.
Like, finding somewhere to rehearse is, and I'm sure everyone goes through this struggle, like in every facet of the nation. But it's hard enough to find a place for Monarch to kind of call home and rehearse and then move our trailer and move our equipment. And with Texas sports being so big, it makes it harder. Where like the football team has access to everything in regards to facilities, or like now it's basketball season, now it's volleyball season, and so I have this pipe dream of like someone in Monarch winning the lottery and then just like buying a warehouse and that just becoming the rehearsal facility. But yeah, like if we could find a place, we already have the infrastructure in place, I should say, where, we would do just the local circuit with that group. They would be tagged along with the instruments. We have already talked to our endorsers about, supporting a second group and everyone's on board. Our recent age outs are super excited about wanting to do that. It's just, can we find a human being to be like the director of that group to like handle all those facilities, and two, a place that that group could call home, and like those students could come to and rehearse. So it is definitely in the works. It's something that we talk about pretty much every year. It's just COVID kind of did reset a lot of things for a lot of people, where we were making the most progress in 2019, where we had been in world class for a few years. We had gotten all of our sponsors and everything. And right when we, 2020, we were like, okay, we're going to do Monarch Open the next year. We lost Monarch's housing site because of COVID, so it's
Mhm.
like now we were starting over with Monarch, so we couldn't really think about the second group. So we're hoping soon, we're definitely wanting that to be a thing.
If it ever does happen, I got a suggestion for a name. I mean, the lion is Monarch. You could call it like Simba Indoor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or better yet, you talk about getting sponsors. Torchy's Indoor Percussion. Maybe get Torchy's to sponsor you guys.
Yeah. Dude,
Yeah.
I would be there every weekend if Torchies was giving us food.
Yeah. So okay, enough of my shenanigans there. Back into the serious stuff. So you teach with Mike for a few years. 2020, you get your opportunity to be, the battery caption. Is that something you that Ben brought you in on, or did you come as a team when you went to Mandarins, or how did that whole thing go down?
No, I think again, I was really fortunate where I worked with just incredible teams, and they were separate. Like the Monarch team and the Blue Knights team were separate. And yeah, when it all went down in 2020, Ben and Andy, they're the arrangers for Monarch. They called me up, and like I said, they wanted us to do the thing as a team. And part of it was, hey, can I bring some of the Blue Knights people? Like, I don't want them to be homeless. Like, they're great educators. And again, I have to thank Ben for it. He was very amicable because he had his team that he brought in from the Colts, right, when he got the gig. And he was fully supportive and said, hey, like, let's find a way to merge this. And so we actually merged our teams. We merged the Colts and the Blue Knights teams. And, we were able to create that thing at Mandarins. And it was super fun. It was fun to have that kind of like just that wall be permeated, and have all the homies in the same spot. So yeah, it was Ben who brought me on as a battery guy, and then in 2023, I believe they kind of quote promoted me up to the caption head gig um, at that point.
Um, so let me ask you. This is another one of the sort of questions that I've always wanted to ask you about. Um, what what Mike and the team you included did at Blue Knights during that era was pretty impactful, right? Um, it was a big shift in terms of like, here's something new. Even though you could probably point to Mike's earlier years and go, you could see sort of the workings of it. That time um, was like the realization of that, right? Um, it's very easy because when something is really impactful, um, it's very easy for things to then look derivative when other people try to adopt it, right? So I think what you see a lot of is when people look at what Mike does, um, they start to mimic things. Just, I mean, out of sheer like being a fan and being inspired and all of that. You actually worked with him, so you had it wasn't just seeing it from the outside. You understood what created a lot of that, right? When you do what you guys did at Monarch, and then you go to Mandarins, right? Um, how do you not come off as being derivative? Because I don't think you guys do. Um, and this kind of gets into a little bit of the conversation of identity, right? And how do you form that? So can you talk about that a little bit of like, what do you bring with you? Um, and then what do you supply of your own that may be outside of that, and blending all of that together?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you nailed it. Like I think imitation is the greatest form of flattery at this sense, like in this activity, it's and everywhere, I talk about it of influence. Like James Harden, love him or hate him, like he changed the basketball game because of that step back, like
Mm-hmm.
now everyone does it. Things like that, where I feel like Mike came on the scene and like he I kind of say it's like indoors, outdoors, right? He like brought the indoor scene outdoors, and everyone realized, oh, this can work, and so they kind of tried to get influence from it. Like you said, for me, the coolest part was understanding how he crafted that, like what was important to him, and how he was able to do the things he did, but also why he did them. Like he would tell us about why he wrote certain things. And having that, I know it's hard because like people are always like, oh, Mike's all pretentious and he doesn't, explain his shows and his shows go over my head. And like, sure, but also if you do have that insider knowledge of what the show means, I think it's so impactful, where it's like getting an interview with Christopher Nolan and
Hmm.
understanding why he like did what he did. And
Can I
so,
can I pause you for one
yeah,
second? Because I just
absolutely.
because I just wanted to hit on something you just said, just from knowing people that had been in his groups. Um, it's not. I'm my personal take is it's not that Mike doesn't want to explain it to everybody. I think he would like the audience to experience it and to bring, it almost like if he supplies too much, it doesn't allow the audience to then bring something to it. But also, there's another part of it, which is not everything, not all the information is meant for everybody, and there is information that should be kept in house. Like sports teams talk about, this is we're gonna take care of this in the locker room. This isn't something for the press or anything like that. Um, and I think it goes hand in hand with how he creates what he does. Is that there are things that are purely for the staff and the members to discuss and think about and be privy to.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like I said, when you're in like that group, right? Like for me, that helped me teach it. Like knowing what the story that he was just kind of crafting was helped me be more connected and invested to it. But yeah, as far as like what I took away from it, I think I took away the philosophy without taking away the art, if that makes sense. Where I was able to take his philosophy of like why he does things and how he treats the members and how much passion he puts into crafting what he's crafting, but also realizing like I'll never be Mike Jackson. Like they're my idols. Like that man is to me on a different pedestal. Murray's on a different pedestal, and all I'm trying to do is have the students experience just an ounce of what they gave me. So I'm able to take the human experience of it from him, and the fact of trying to make all of our art matter, because I think one of the things for me that was helpful was that at least at Mandarins or the original days of Monarch, I wasn't a designer. I was solely just the surgeon. I was the person who took the steps and executed them. And so I was able to establish culture and a identity of how we play and how we sound, and try to make other people's vision come to life. And then just recently is when I actually started doing more of the design side. And even then, I think it's important that the voice of Monarch, or the voice of when we were at the Mandarins is still, Ben and Andy have that influence, so they can tell their story to the world. And it's our job to kind of create that in a medium that again allows members, staff, audience to all experience it however they want to experience it.
But you are designing now, right? And you're doing more of that. Um, where does that come from for you? So, I mean, you're finding things to express as you sort of started to do that more. Where is it coming from for you?
Yeah, again, just like literally, I feel like now we have this like motif here in this podcast. I didn't want to design. I never had any intentions of doing it. And then after 2022, well, I was involved in the design calls, as like I think it's important to have the person on the ground in the know, where I would just kind of be a fly on the wall, and the design team would talk about something, and that way I would be able to teach it more accurately and more representative of what they wanted, and not be completely in the dark. But then in 2022, right after WGF finals, the president of the board and I had a conversation. He kind of just straight up said, "Hey, Taha, like you need to be program coordinator." And I told him no. I said, "I think the other people are more qualified. They should do it." And he just asked me again. He said, "What are you scared of?" And I told him everything that I was scared of. That I don't want to be the reason that the students aren't successful. That the students are too good for me to ruin what they could potentially achieve. And he kind of said, that's exactly why you need to be it. And I told him that I didn't want to take on that position, and that the design team we had, there are people who are qualified in that team. Because again, I've never done it. Like I'd never been a program coordinator. I've been doing things, and he said that this conversation is stemming from the design team reaching out to me saying this needs to happen. And so that was kind of, I guess, all the trust that I needed. And so I kind of took the plunge, and I jumped into it, and it's honestly been really fun. The inspiration for shows, at least for me, have, whenever I pitch an idea, a lot of it has come from a place of emotion and what I think what is important to the students maybe at this point of their lives versus maybe what could be important to them in the future as well. And so we're trying to design shows that there's obviously a surface level, that everyone can understand, that's accessible for everybody, but the deeper the layers go, the more personal it gets. And I think that to me is what's exciting about a show and doing art and, you know, being a performer, is that you can put your narrative into it, and there's a narrative that the crowd and the audience and whoever else can understand, but also like the show means different things to every member. Like each member has a different experience with the show because they're able to like personally invest themselves into it. Because again, we're asking them to be so vulnerable. We're asking these students to be just raw and emotional, with their time and their efforts and their thought process, and wherever they are in their life. And like we talked about, there's so many things that we don't know about them, and they don't know about us. Like like I don't know everything about what you're going through personally. I don't know what could be happening in your life, and same to the opposite side. But I think it's important to have something where the students can find a medium to express that, where they may not get that chance in other places in their life, but they can at least find a way to like influence and be connected to something and express that, and not have to explain to people why they feel a certain way. Where it's like, I'm never going to ask someone at Monarch like what their relationship with their giver was, but I know that for them, they were able to like find that and put that in the show for themselves. And when they like release the last note at finals, their emotion comes out, and it's like they were able to emotionally find a place where maybe they didn't have that opportunity elsewhere. Maybe they didn't want to talk to anyone about it. Maybe they didn't want to like write it down in a journal, but like that, playing the music and performing it was what they needed. So that's what we're trying to do.
The last two Monarch shows, just the design wise, has just been incredible for me. Especially, I don't want to talk too much about 2024 because I'll just start crying because that show just really hit me.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain it, but
well, I mean, but it's not hard to explain because it's just it's real and authentic and compelling.
And I just I remember watching it at the rehearsal that we got to go to, and I'm watching it and it gets to the end and I'm like, oh, they better not do this. And then when it happened, I was like,
yep,
just tears because it
it
touched down deep.